enough. During the rainy seasons, my family grows vegetables and tubers for our consumptions. Also, start working on sustainable circular agriculture. Costa Rica coffee sector has the challenge of reusing the coffee brush. Currently, in most cases, is not used. With the help of innovation and technology, coffee brush is a product with high potential. We as a farmers should seek information and apply to national and international programs that support sustainable agriculture. Ensure fair payments, human housing conditions, and social guarantees for the people who are directly and indirectly involved in the activity. Include vulnerable population. Value and respect the role of women in agriculture and in farming families. What can I say to all my fellow farmers is let's prepare ourselves and be brave. Support of action and not words from the government. When I speak about or when I refer to government, I'm not talking about only the central government. I'm talking about a work, an interconnectional work with all the ministries, technology, agriculture, Women Institute, education, economy, commerce, and also why not public and private audience. Also, they were asking us to bring something that represents for us what is sustainability in food production, supply, and consumption. Today, I brought my family coffee. I don't know if you can see it. The reason why this represents me sustainability in food is because I know the traceability and I know that my family it's highly committed with the protection of the environment, and also we take care of social and economic situation to be as much fair as we can. Also, this item represent added value, and that is one of the things that I think that we as a farmers should do. Uh, they were asking us what is the food system for me, and the most basic answer will be that is the trajectory, the channel, and the context that food has from the producer to the final consumer. In this system, the social, the environmental, and the economic impact generated by the food production is taken into account. And how does this system play out in my work? To be honest, the last year, thanks to COVID-19, the system has changed a lot. And to be honest, I think it will be changing during the next year. These circumstances show us how vulnerable the system still is. We as a producer should be aware about possible actions. Despite of throughout my life and in the coffee sector, I have seen an unfair and with a lot of challenges system. I consider that most of the opinion about how the system played out is determined by past experience. Specifically in the value chain and in the economic area, the producer, and talking about specifically to the coffee sector, the producer were delivering his or her harvest to a first buyer, and he or she lost total knowledge of his product traceability. The pay were unfair and are unfair, and in most of the cases not enough to maintain the activity itself, much less for the sustenance of the family. I would like to talk about I already spoke about the economic area and the value chain. I also would like to talk about how this system works in the social level. The coffee sector generates a large number of jobs. However, providing all social guarantees to the people involved remains a challenge. The mentality of producers must be aware of the responsibility we have to preserve the planet. There is an urgent need to involve the new generations in the activity. I believe that young people have seen their parents and grandparents suffer many injustices, so they have chosen not to continue with the activity and even sell their lands to people or entities with high eager to make money, regardless of the environment impact. The gender gap in the coffee sector is something to improve. There are injustices not only in payment, also in the treatment. If you ask me about my coffee, I wouldn't like you just to sell you some grams of coffee. I would like to invite you to come to my country to know my family story and everything that is behind a cup of coffee. I would like you to know that supporting small producer, you are also helping a town to grow. In the environmental level, I think it will depend on what you think or what you want to do, if you want to protect or not the environment. In our case, we are highly committed to the environment, protecting the environment. 80% of the farm is primary forest, and for us that is something untouchable. We see it as a loan for our community, for the world, and for the future generations. In the same way, within the farm, there is one of the main sources of water to our community. We are aware that water sources are public goods and necessary for humanity. Therefore, we make a strenuous effort to protect it. We belong to the Rainforest Alliance program. We ensure that our production and processing practice have a negative or neutral impact on the environment. But my coffee, it's the object that I already showed you. Is the result of great effort to make the coffee business a sustainable, profitable, and competitive activity. We still have many opportunities to improve, but we continue working with love, patience, commitment to our community, to our country, and to our planet. Thank you very much for the space, and I think later we will have a space for question. If you have any question, I will be open.
Thank you, Delfina, for this very good visualization around the coffee bean and what it means to have a system around the coffee bean. So yeah, I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Sharma and how he sees, or Mr. Sharma, how you see sustainability and a food system in your experiences made so far. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I, first of all, would like to express my thanks to the Sustainability Week organizers. I think it's an opportunity to talk about what I consider as sustainable food systems and also draw from the global experiences. Having said that, before I think I begin, I'd like to share what I think is closest to me as far as sustainability is concerned. This is a book. I hope you can see this. It's a book on Mohandas. Now, don't get too shocked. The name may not make sense to you, but this is the first name of Mahatma Gandhi. You know, his name was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and the book is titled Mohandas. To me, Gandhi epitomizes what sustainability should be for the globe. And learning from him or reading him for long, I think there are two messages that I would like to convey here. First, he said was that a country like India needs production by the masses and not production for the masses. I think this has a tremendous relevance to what global agriculture is all about and what sustainability that we are wanting the world to really move on to as far as the food systems are concerned. The second message that he has conveyed very loudly is that whenever you are in confusion or you are struck and you don't know what to do, just bring the picture of the poorest of the poor that you know in front of your eyes and think whether what the decision you're going to take is going to be helpful for him or not. That is the Mahatma Gandhi's talisman that we all know. So drawing from these two wonderful layouts for sustainability. This is exactly what has been the focus of my work on sustainable food system over the last few decades. Especially coming at a time when India is witnessing a massive farm movement where hundreds of thousands of farmers are protesting, and they have been camping outside New Delhi or the borders of New Delhi for 4 months now, living on the streets in trolleys or in tents, and now preparing for the harsh summer months, that we are heading towards. Basically, what the farmers are protesting is, of course, the economic insecurity that they are faced with, and they would like to have a kind of a assured income, which of course is a global problem. But the other thing that I think the farmers are really fighting against is the unsustainable food systems that the country is getting ready to bring in by way of opening up the markets, bringing agriculture under the corporate control. And that is what the farmers are opposed to. And this is a movement which has a global implication, because we all know for several decades now, at least, that we know of, in several countries, farmers have been protesting, seeking a guaranteed income or wanting guaranteed income. But somehow it hasn't happened. And therefore, the farmers movement in India has resonance to farmer movements everywhere in the world, and where farmers are actually striving or are struggling to seek a kind of a income that brings not only subsistence to them, but also ensures profitability, as was mentioned earlier. But this hasn't happened. And this is perhaps one reason that I think sustainability is suffering from, or the issue of sustainability, it cannot be addressed till we are able to provide income security for the farmers. Whether it is in the United States, whether it is in the European Union or the other rich developed countries, or for that matter, the poor developing countries, the fact of the matter is that when we talk of sustainable food system, I think there couldn't be a better challenge or a better opportunity or timing, because given the kind of unsustainable food systems that we have evolved ever since the Green Revolution, or ever since the Green Revolution strengthened that mechanism to destroy not only the natural resources, but also destroy biodiversity and nature, water, and contaminate the food chain. In India, India has been no exception. Ever since the Green Revolution began in the mid 1960s in India, the emphasis has been on overproduction, production, and production. It was, as was elsewhere, a production-centric development that India adopted, and there were certain pockets of a Green Revolution. The northwestern part, from where I come from in India, is the food bowl. And there the damage to the environment has been huge. The water table was receding to a huge depth, and at the same time we have other environmental problems confronting farmers and confronting the society. And so there, on the one hand, we have an issue of moving away to ecologically or agroecological farming systems. On the other hand, we have a system where, or we have adopted an approach where market-oriented agriculture is now being opened up, or India is being opened up for market-led movement as far as agriculture is concerned. Now, I haven't seen private companies getting anywhere in the world into agriculture and bringing in an agroecological farming system. We have seen devastation, whether it is in Brazil or Latin America or in America or European Union and so on, wherever these corporates have gone in. And I still don't understand how we can be talking about sustainable food systems. Of course, the jargon would all be there, but the fact of the matter is, if you are going to bring in the corporate farming systems into agriculture in India, I wonder what kind of farming systems are we going to look at in the future, or what is the kind of sustainability parameters that are going to stare at us as we go along, or prepare food for the future, as we say. So here we are in a mix, and or in a fix, I would say, to really understand what sustainability means in a real sense as far as agriculture in India is concerned, or for that matter, agriculture in the rest of the world is concerned. As I said earlier, my work, drawing from Mahatma Gandhi, has focused more on the sustainable livelihoods and on the viability of farming systems, whether they are agroecological farming systems or whether they are industrial farming system. The fact of the matter is, in either case, the farmers do not have a guaranteed farming income or farm income that sustains their livelihoods. And this is something which has hit farmers everywhere in the world, not only the cocoa farmers or the coffee growers in Costa Rica or Latin America or Africa, but even for cereal growers or cereal farmers in the rest of the world, and so on with the other farming communities. Now, this has to be understood that since in America, let's to begin with that, since the early 1970s, when Richard Nixon was the president, his agriculture secretary had made a statement, said, get big or get out. Now, this is exactly what America did. You know, we have seen small farmers getting out of agriculture, and the situation is so tense and so terse now that only 1.5% of the population remains in farming as far as America is concerned. And the distress that we see in American agriculture is huge. Despite massive subsidies being pumped into agriculture every 5 years under the Farm Bill, American farmers are saddled with a bankruptcy of $425 billion. We also see that the rate of suicide in rural America is 45% higher than urban America. And the same situation exists in the other developed countries. So when we talk of sustainability, I think what we need to understand is that as long as food is cheap, and as long as the effort is to provide cheaper food for the consumers, you know, we cannot expect the kind of sustainability that we are all talking about. And, you know, one, of course, it hits the farmer, but also it hits the food systems. And therefore, the challenge before us is to ensure that how do we balance this out in the days to come or in the years to come. And I think there's a big challenge for India in this direction. And I would like to share before I close one classical example where an effort is being made in India. And that is in the south of the country, a state called Andhra Pradesh. And now, of course, it is split into two, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh in South India, where they have launched a program to convert 16 million farming families from chemical to non-chemical agriculture. So far, about 6 million farmers or higher than that have been shifted or from chemical agriculture to non-chemical agriculture. And by 2024, the states expect that, as I said earlier, 60 million would be the people who would be moved up from chemical agriculture to agroecological farming systems. Now, this is one approach that I think needs to be expanded to the rest of the country and perhaps to the rest of the world, because I think this is the world's biggest agroecological model that exists in India, and we have lessons for not only farmers in India, but as I said earlier, but farmers elsewhere also. But secondly, more importantly, is to ensure whether these are ecological system or whether we have the industrial farming system, income security is what should be the utmost priority. And if we have to achieve sustainable food system, the first and foremost thing that we have to ensure is to ensure that the farmers can get an assured income by way of an assured price. That is where I think sustainability hinges on. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sharma. Indeed, we can see a connection between your point and Mrs. Solis' point. That in all these global mechanisms, we should never forget about the roots. So the roots are the individual farmers who actually provide us the entire food, so we can even have this network. So it's about reconsidering the entire scales also from the individual to the global network. So yes, I would like to now hear from Professor Saab. What is your perspective on food, on sustainability in food, and on the system in it?
Thank you very much, Delphine. I hope you can all hear me. So thank you very much for organizing this. It's wonderful to be on the panel with you all and to be able to engage with you, and congratulations to you all for organizing not only this event but many events over the past week. So let me just obviously these are huge questions. So this is just some of my my thoughts and reflections that are very much based on the experiences that I've had and the perspectives that I'm coming from. So in terms of what sustainability of food means, I'm not going to offer a definition, but just a couple of words, just a couple of words that really come to my mind as words that I find very important when we talk about sustainability in general, or particularly food sustainability. And the first word is balance. And the second is a second word or set of words is specificity and context. So let me just explain a little bit what I mean by those words, and I'll give you an anecdote from. So I graduated as a lawyer. And when I finished when I completed my master's degree, I did my master's in public international law. I wasn't actually specializing in food and agriculture at all. I didn't have any particular expertise in that from my studies. But I got a job at the Ministry of Agriculture in the Netherlands. So immediately after I finished my master's degree. And the first job that I had, so the first project that I had to work on, was a project that was, so we had a Minister of Agriculture at that time, and what I had to do basically was, okay, you have 6 months, and we want you to figure out how we can get consumers to consume more sustainably. So I was fresh out of law studies, and so for lawyers, language and being very precise about what it is that you're actually trying to do is very important. That's something that you really learn. So I showed up to my first day on the job, and I got this description of the project that I had to do. And so I asked my colleagues in a meeting that we had, okay, so I have to figure out how we can get consumers to consume more sustainably. This was particularly in relation to food. So I asked, so what do we mean by sustainable consumption? And the response was basically, my colleagues just looked at me, didn't say anything, and continued with their meeting as if I hadn't asked the question. And I was very confused, because I thought, well, surely I have to know what is meant by sustainable consumption, what is meant by sustainable, before I do that project. And in quite a similar vein, we had at the ministry, we had the restaurant, the cafeteria that we had was advertised as being sustainable. So I remember I had many conversations in my sort of early weeks working there with fellow junior colleagues, mostly, as to, okay, what does that mean, being sustainable? So I remember that, for instance, the slices of cheese, because this is the Netherlands after all, and that's what you have for lunch, is bread and cheese. They were individually wrapped. So you would have slices of cheese or slices of ham or whatever would be individually wrapped in plastic. And so we thought, that doesn't seem sustainable to me, having one slice of cheese, each individually wrapped in plastic. But then the counter argument to that was well, if you have like a big chunk of cheese and you ask people to slice it themselves, you might not have as much plastic, but you'll have more food waste, because you can't keep that as much. So what that really showed me very early on in dealing with these questions, first of all, is that it's very important to be precise about what it is that you're trying to, what does sustainability mean, not in any general kind of way, because you're never going to get one definition of what is sustainable food, but to be very precise about which angle are you coming from, and what are you trying to engage with. So which part of sustainable food are you trying to engage with, and what part are you trying to address? That goes back to the question of balance, right? So I think this is something that Delfina mentioned. Also, if you see the sort of the definition of sustainability, right? It has 3 pillars. So you look at people, at planet, and at profit. You have the social perspective, you have the environmental perspective, and you have the the economic perspective. So these are three pillars, but you cannot reconcile those pillars. You can't find a sort of a place or kind of an endpoint where like there's a perfect reconciliation between these different pillars. So you have to find a balance, and not a balance that's sort of the perfect balance, but a balance that you're comfortable with. And this relates back to being precise about what it is that you are speaking about, what it is that you're addressing. So when it comes to sustainable food and what does that mean? My answer, and this is very much as an academic, I think there's a reason why after I did policy work, I went into academia, or sort of back into academia, is because I am quite interested in asking those bigger questions, but I also think that it's very important. So if I would be in the same job at the Ministry of Agriculture, being asked to do the same assignment, so how do you get people to consume more sustainably? So in the position that I am now, I would have pushed much harder, not in sort of coming up with the definition on what sustainable consumption means, but at least to be very precise on what is it that we're looking for. How do you try to find what sustainable consumption is, and not just by asking people, are you consuming sustainably, but what are sort of, how do you identify sustainable consumption? So to really be much more precise about that. I had something that I wanted to show, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it. I basically just took a picture on my phone, so I'll try to show it. But I will explain what it is. Oh, you can now see the reflection of the rest of my house. But basically, what I took a picture of is a sort of seasonal food chart. Sorry, is that 1 minute? Delfina? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So a seasonal food chart, which really sort of what I try to what that sort of reflects is that sustainability of food has to be seen in a context as well. Which context are you coming from? So it's not what foods are we going to consume generally, globally, but in which context are you looking? So in which country, in which location, in which social class are you going to be looking at? What kinds of food are you eating, and who are you addressing? So I think I'm going to end it there and leave some of the comments that I had planned for later on in the session. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Professor Saab. Your point on balance is very interesting and probably also very challenging, again, to discuss, as even finding a balance is very contextual. So yeah, I would now give the floor to Mr. Timothy Wise. Maybe he will talk about balance, or maybe on other aspects of food sustainability. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for organizing this. It's seems like such a great initiative. I hope I'm interested to hear what other topics you covered over the course of Sustainability Week. It's certainly timely. I guess I am talking about balance. What occurs to me when I was asked sort of what represents the sustainability of food, it's diversity, and which I think Anne was just referring to. And that's a piece of the balance. Let me see if I can accurately share a screen for what I brought along with me to share. This is the chart from the Mexican Institute Conabio, which is very interestingly the organization of the government dedicated not just to the conservation of biodiversity, but the use of biodiversity. So it's not walling diversity off from humans, it's joining them. And Mexico, as the center of origin for maize, is one of the main centers of diversity, not surprisingly. And it's been a huge battle over generations to defend that diversity. The diversity is astonishing. I mean, these are the so-called land races of maize, the root genetic origins of a wide variety of different kinds of maize that have been adapted at local levels, in local conditions, for all kinds of uses, because the diversity is not just in the type of corn you have, the type of maize, it's in the uses you put it to. So there's some that are for ceremonial purposes, some to feed the livestock, some to use in soup, some to use in tortillas, some to use in tamales, all kinds of different uses that has generated over generations of crop breeding and seed selection by farmers, an enormous number of diversity of maize in Mexico. The CONABIO did a new survey of a census of maize in Mexico in 2011. And they found that where they thought they had 56 original land races, they actually found 5 new ones. They hadn't done one for a long time. So there's now 61 different unique land races like these. And out of those, they found almost 23,000 different varieties that had been adapted to local uses. 23,000 native varieties of maize in Mexico. That is astonishing. And what it highlights to me is that diversity is the culture in agriculture. That's what we're talking about. Agriculture is often reduced to the production of a very limited number of commodities, and the fact is that there is a battle between the different food systems in the world. Devinder Sharma was speaking of the battle in India between local food systems and a corporatized food system. That's what's happening in Mexico. In Mexico, they've been under assault from globalization as the North American Free Trade Agreement allowed unlimited US corn exports of a very uniform yellow corn variety, mainly for animal feed. But the Mexican government, under the new president of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, recently announced that it was going to ban genetically modified corn imports, ban the use of glyphosate, and ban the cultivation of genetically modified corn. And the reason they're banning the cultivation of genetically modified corn is for biodiversity purposes, because corn is pollinated on the wind. The wind can blow transgenic corn pollen and contaminate native varieties. All of those, that diverse array of maize varieties I showed, have been shown to be contaminated by genetically modified traits. It's a bold step on Mexico's part, and interesting that they chose as the reason for banning genetically modified corn imports, which is to take effect in 3 years, are two. One is to protect the underlying agricultural biodiversity in maize in Mexico and protect it from contamination. And the other is to stimulate rural development in southern Mexico among indigenous maize producers, paying a guaranteed price, as Devinder Sharma says they're demanding in India, and by restricting imports, giving them a market for the corn that they're growing. It's a bold step on Mexico's part. That diversity is really the root of the battle for the future of food. In my book, I argue that the battle is between agribusiness and family farmers, basically. And the way we're producing our food in industrialized food systems is quite literally devouring the natural resource base on which future food production depends. So that is the root definition of an unsustainable system. We're destroying the soil, the climate, the water, the seed diversity, and even the animal diversity in areas that are dominated by industrial agriculture. We are also destroying our public health as we reduce the diversity of the crops that we grow. We reduce the diversity of the foods that we eat. And we all know how unhealthy our supermarket foods often are. I define food systems, I like the definition of food systems that the ETC group came up with. They basically said there are many food systems, they fall into two categories: the peasant food system and the commodity chains. They called it a peasant food web and the commodity chains. 70% of the food in the world is grown by peasants in that food web on 30% of the land in the world. 30% of the food, or the food-like substances that are grown in the commodity chains, are grown on 70% of the land, using 70% of the resources. That is the battle for the future of food between those two systems. That battle is being waged in really important ways right now because of the failure of governments to meet any of their targets for reaching zero hunger by 2030, which is the goal of the Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the UN. Next week, there will be negotiations among the Rome-based organizations and governments about the adoption of recommendations on using agroecology instead of the industrial food chain. Very important, very contested. The United States government and most of the other agricultural exporters are pushing back against that recommendation. In October now, I think they're saying, the UN has called a food systems summit that is also hotly contested. It was originally called with the cooperation of the World Economic Forum, the Davos crowd, not who you want running your food system, and not a group that is particularly interested in improving the conditions of the peasant food web. I'll post a link to that I think if people haven't seen it, they'll find interesting. The best analysis I've seen in years of the global food system came from the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPACE Food, they go by. It was started by former Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Olivier de Schutter, and some colleagues. And the report is called From Uniformity to Diversity. And that's how they frame the goal of transforming our food systems. And I think it's a very good, concise way to frame what we should be trying for. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wise. So now out of these speeches we have heard, main things that I have heard out is finding a balance between these three pillars of sustainability. We have the aspect of diversity, but we also heard about different scales, especially micro scales, considering again less the macro industrial level, but also considering non-industrial agriculture and farmers. At the same time, we have the SDGs that are supposed to lead us to work all together, act globally, trying to coordinate and homogenize everything. But now I would like to invite you to brainstorm or discuss a bit among the panelists. Should we now heterogenize this global food system so it becomes more sustainable again, or what do you see as the biggest challenge? Do we need to go back to local food systems? Does this entire industrial trading networks make sense? Do we need it? I mean, this is how most of the world is functioning now, through a big trading movement of food. We all are dependent of it right now. So yeah, I give the floor to the most inspired person. And we have, I'm sorry, for technical reasons, we lost a bit of time. We have 15 more minutes for this discussion. Maybe Mr. Sharma, you would like to start?
Well, yes, as you rightly said, this is quite a complex subject to really dwell on. And there are various dimensions to it. Yes, we need the local food systems compared to the globalized kind of food systems. We need to reduce the food miles, that kind of a regime which cropped up because of the globalization process and the international trade, push on international trade, which of course is also leading to climate change, more of greenhouse gases, gas emissions leading to climate change and so on. So basically, yes, we need to overhaul the kind of agriculture that exists today. We need that kind of a leadership. We need that kind of a statesmanship today, which should be actually calling for a radical change as far as the food systems are concerned. And I think that will perhaps come from a strong leader somewhere. I'm not sure whether the kind of a process that we have globally today initiated, or this present movement, we see a lot of effort on the sustainable food systems being discussed. But unless somebody more powerful and somebody who can really call the shots. For instance, I still remember why I'm saying this is in 2009 World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum actually decided to entrust the task of food security to 17 corporations, which included Nestle, which included Yara, Monsanto, and so on. And these corporations had promised to, in the next 20 years, increase productivity by 20% and reduce poverty by 20%, and also ensure food security. Now, if this is the kind of objective, this is the kind of sustainable food systems, quote unquote, that we are trying to promote, I think we are still not out of the crisis that we should be aiming at or planning to get out of it. So in a way, I think we are still waiting for that leadership, maybe at the level of G20 or G7, somebody who can stand up and say, well, the world's food system need to change, and change for the better. I don't know. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Maybe someday some sensible leader crops up.
Okay, Mr. Weiss, and then Professor Saab, you can intervene.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly to the point I wanted to make, which is that, I went out into the world to research my book, which took about 5 years of traveling around the world, and from Southern Africa to India to Mexico and to the heartland of the United States. And the question I was asking myself is why, if we know what works, if we know that the way we're devouring the natural resource base that we'll need to grow food in the future, why do we keep doing it? And why are our governments ignoring the sustainable alternatives all around them, offered by their own small scale farmers? And the answer that I came up with is from all these travels is it's the excessive economic and political power of agribusiness, of those corporate entities, which really dominate the policy process in ways that continue to amaze me. I'm pretty cynical about what corporations are doing out in the world, but I'm still often surprised. Most people don't know, for example, that the US agribusiness lobby spends more money in Washington than the entire military industry does. it is one of the biggest forces in Washington. And I think finding ways to get to, one, break up some of the monopolies that dominate those industries, the seed monopolies, the transportation monopolies, is one way to do it. And the other is to really get money out of politics, is to clean up our political system so that they don't have the control they do and the influence they do over politics, which is a particular problem, obviously, for the United States.
Okay, Professor Saab.
Yeah, thank you so much. So actually, the previous two comments really go also exactly in the same direction as I wanted to comment on as well. So first thing I wanted to say is something that I didn't yet respond to in my previous comments is what a food system is, or what food systems are. And I think something really important to mention is we're talking about food, but in many ways, it's not about food. It's about power. It's about poverty. It's about inequality. This is something that Mr. Sharma mentioned as well, right? So income security. So in a way, it's not about food, but it's about other things that that very much influence food systems. So I think that's something very important to to consider here as well when you're talking about food sustainability and how you get food sustainability. It's not enough to look at the food system in a very narrow sense, as if it's only about food. So it's about all these other things as well. And then one thing, I mean, if you'd ask me sort of what is a solution, so I entirely agree. It is highly problematic, the enormous power that agribusiness have and that private sectors, I mean, not just agri business, just private sector, private corporations have. But what I personally find more problematic is the lack of power that states are exercising, that public authorities are exercising. So in many ways, and this is something that this perspective, I sort of came to it through my research as an international lawyer who looks at states primarily, like what are states doing, that I find it very often too simple to say, well, it's, I mean, it's very easy to criticize big corporations. It's very easy to criticize Monsanto and to criticize big supermarket chains. But to give an example, it is a huge issue, I think, the kinds of things that you can buy in the supermarket. But I find, okay, can we put all that blame on corporations because corporations are supposed to make a profit, right? That is their intention. Private businesses are supposed to be making profit. But I find it problematic that you don't have more state intervention saying it is not okay to be advertising foods like this to people. It's not okay that for many people, choosing a healthy diet, it's not a choice. It's not a choice, and it's not only to do with what they can afford or what's available in terms of foods, but also what are you subsidizing? What are you not subsidizing? What are you making available? How are you educating people? So it's really a much bigger problem. So for me, the big issue is I guess the lack of power that public authorities are exercising. And so where public authorities, states should say, I think, we're not going to sell these things in supermarkets. We're not going to allow this. We're going to tax them way higher. We're going to make sure that that children in schools have access to proper food, rather than emphasizing all, sort of putting all your focus on, oh, these bad corporations are doing sort of this and that, when it's really, public authorities who we have elected who are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, in my view.
Thank you, Professor Saab. Ms. Solis, what do you say about governments and governance positioning itself? What do you say about empowerment of smallholders? And yeah, what are your comments on this debate?
Okay, thank you. Regarding to governments, I think now it's time to stop talking and start actions. Uh, in most of the cases, we hear speech where we are protecting the environment, when we are protecting to have fair food systems, but actually it is not. When you were asking us which were the main challenges, I was thinking the necessity of having a structural and generation changing. And how can we get this? I really bet for life education, not formal education. I'm not talking about math, Spanish, English, no. I'm talking about a life education. And how can we get this? We should start doing joint action, but not as the ones that we have been doing in the past years. We have to start working from the local government, identifier leaders, identifying people who can really impact in a positive way from the small towns into the whole world around. So I think we also have a big challenges with like big companies and how they handle and manipulate the markets. I know that it's complicated and it's so easy to criticize what they are doing, and that is what I wouldn't like to do right now. As a human being, first of all, I want to highlight the responsibility that we have to do our best in our square meter. It means the small actions that we can do. If we start doing small actions, at the end we will have a big action that it will really impact the world. I think it's like we have been talking a lot and not in this space all over around the world. National and international institutes are just planting amazing initiatives, but what is the result? Are they giving like real impact to the society? I think this is one of the biggest questions. And I remember once of my university classes, really good professor told us, and this phrase make it really changed like my life and the person who I am. That before being as a worker, before being a coffee producer, before being an ambassador, before being a lawyer, I am a citizen. And I am responsible for my town. I am responsible for my country. And I'm responsible for the world. So if you ask me, I know that there are a lot of challenges. I know climate change, affordable, sustainable agriculture. We are running out into an agriculture without farmers, and there are a lot of points to highlight. But if you ask me, I will really bet for education in life, starting from short ages, and to have a coordination between, for example, education ministries with the government, with the local government, with the companies, like with private companies. There is no way, because there are short-term solutions. For example, for agriculture, for farmers, credits are short-term solutions. They are not really helping. If your activity is not profitable enough, if you have high social charges, you cannot pay a loan. It's easy. So what we need is a structural and generational changing. If we get this change, the people who will be in the government, the people who will be leading these companies will be also social aware about the importance of protecting the planet that we have right now. So I know that there are some short-term solutions, but like the biggest solutions, we have to do it in a really solidified way. That's why I'm really betting for life education.
Thank you, Mrs. Solis. There are so many questions coming in. I would like to now give the floor to people who have questions. I find it very interesting that we're taking in the aspect as well of education and politics. It sounds to me, I just would like to drop in this notion of somehow deindustrializing education and deindustrializing politics. Yeah, maybe you can keep this in mind somehow as food for thought. And yeah, I would like to give the floor now to Ida, who has to make a selection of the most relevant questions from the audience. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delphine. We indeed have a lot of questions coming in. Thank you everyone for submitting them. In the interest of time, we'll get through as many as we can. First of all, to Mr. Sharma, there were a few questions coming in regarding, namely, do you see the large farmers in northwestern India moving to a more sustainable agricultural system in the near future? And what type of policies do you think can enable that shift? And if you could also share the name of the book that you showed us earlier.
Well, as far as the big farmers of Punjab and Haryana, the food bowl, are concerned in the northwestern part of India, they are relatively, as compared to the rest of the country, doing better than the farmers in the rest of the country, as I said. And the point that they should move away to more sustainable farming system depends upon if the government is willing to provide them, as I said earlier, an assured income for an alternate cropping pattern that the government wants to introduce. You know, as long as farmers do not have an option of moving from intensive farming system, wheat and paddy, to crops like maize or any alternative crops that you would like to introduce, in the sense that you have a mechanism where the farmers get an assured income, so that he can move away from the present cropping pattern to that cropping pattern. I don't think it's going to work. So therefore, to expect these central laws that the government has introduced, which means bringing in the market-oriented agriculture, which means bringing in corporate agriculture. And of course, we all know that corporate agriculture is coming here for only profits. So I don't think we're going to address that particular issue of sustainability as far as farming practices are concerned in Punjab and Haryana. So we need a policy change here. We need a policy design. And that is where I think, as was mentioned earlier, we need to keep in mind that when we talk of governance and we talk of economic policies, you know, what we need to deindustrialize basically is the economic design that the world is following. You know, if you have to sacrifice agriculture for the sake of the industry, I think unless we do that, or unless we move away from that paradigm, I don't think we will be moving towards the kind of sustainable food system that we would like to have. Regarding the book, this book is called Mohandas, and it is a true story, as it says, of a man, its people, and the empire. And this is by his grandson, Raj Mohan Gandhi. And Mohandas, as I said, is it's the first name of Mahatma Gandhi.
Thank you so much. Our next question is directed to Professor Saab. Is there a recommended framework or tools that can help measure how one's work is impacting the 3 pillars of sustainability, i.e. any framework or tool that can inform an organization's decision-making to have the least trade-offs as possible?
Great, okay. So it might be a disappointing answer. I don't have any tools to share with you that can give you the answer to this question, or that can tell you how to best, make that decision or make that balance. But I think the point that I wanted to make really is that you have to make a choice when you are trying to deal with something relating to sustainability, relating to food sustainability. What is it that you put an emphasis on? What is it that you value in a particular context from a particular perspective? So it's difficult to say, what has the least trade-offs, or it depends on how you interpret what you want to get out of, how do you see sustainability? So in the bit of a silly example that I gave about the cheese, do you have one slice or which has more plastic waste or do you have more food waste if you're going to? So there's no one answer to any of those questions on what you should choose. So in the end, I think it's a matter of choice, and it has to be informed choice. So I don't think there's any sort of easy way of, you know, putting information into a kind of calculator and getting the right answer. It requires decisions and choices, I think, that have to be justified.
Thank you, Professor Saab, for that answer. That's very true what you're saying. I think we have time for one more question, and this is kind of directed to everyone. So perhaps maybe one person who is most inspired can speak up. But how do we push for agroecological systems? How do we win against the corporate food business and governments that pass policies in their favor?
Yeah, I'd be happy to weigh in on that one. I've been working a lot on agroecology lately, around these policy processes in particular, one of which are very important. I mean, I think the lovely thing about this panel for me is that it's covered sort of actions at the local level, actions at the national level, and we've talked about actions at the international level. Very little funding from national governments or from international agencies goes to promote agroecological practices, more sustainable agricultural practices. It goes to conventional agricultural development very much along the lines of the Green Revolution. And that is, that has to change. There's a much wider recognition now that has to change, that business as usual, industrializing agriculture is going to condemn us to a very food insecure future. That's why this food summit was called by the UN. But the solutions have to be a change from business as usual policies. And unfortunately, as I've said in some talks, the powers that be usually turn to business, and the businesses are not going to be the ones who suggest an end to business as usual. They want business to continue as usual. The answers are going to come from a whole new set of coalitions of consumers, environmentalists, farmers, demanding a more sustainable and healthier food system. And those calls are growing, and they're taking hold in places like Mexico, Senegal, parts of India, as Devinder Sharma said. I think I like to think that the tide is turning, but I'm very aware that the powers that be are very capable of manipulating the tides. So it really is going to take an all-out effort and a real declaration of emergency to get the kind of resources and the change in policies that we need to address it. Climate change puts that emergency front and center for all of us, and then the COVID pandemic adds to it. So I think there is some new urgency that I see, and I'm hopeful about that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weiss. I'm very sorry we could not cover all questions, but I would like to invite you all to post your questions on our Facebook event page of this panel, and it will be shared in the chat in a minute. And post your questions there. Panelists, dear panelists, maybe you could check in if there's some questions you would like to respond to in a written version. Yeah, I just would like to provide you this space to keep on talking. So thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to Filippo Buzzini, who created a sketch of all this discussion. Filippo, the floor is yours. I'm very much excited about this.
Yes, if you can give me 15 more seconds, I will then
Yes.
share the screen.
Of course, of course. So yeah, you can use the time, dear audience, to go to the Facebook event page, post your questions there, see if maybe you can even answer some of the questions. Maybe you feel very inspired, and yeah, so we can keep the conversation going.
I'd also like to mention in the meantime that we thank you all for joining this last event of Sustainability Week Geneva. It's been an honor.
So it appears as I am ready. But so I did a graphic recording, so real-time summary of the conversation about sustainable food systems. Started with a nice sentence from Delphine that like the goal is to make humanity flourish in a more balanced manner. So about the sustainability on food, we had 4 inputs. The first one about producing coffee with respect to economy, environment, and society. And to do that, we need to consider several elements of sustainability on such as product traceability, fair pricing, avoid deforestation, the quality of the product knowledge, and also to guarantee profitability and competitivity to make an experience out of coffee in general, also to support small producer that can help a town to grow. The product was presented here, meaning what a sustainable food is the family coffee. Product for the second input was a book about Gandhi, the Mohandas, where it said that agriculture should be by the masses and not for the masses. They talked about farmers' produce in India in order to guarantee an income and to combat an unsustainable food system. And the solution is a shift towards agroecological farming system. But what does sustainability mean? Well, the most important part was to ensure a farmer's income, and that we cannot expect sustainability as long as food is so cheap, and also the non-chemical agriculture is sustainable one. Towards the third input, so what does it mean to get consumers to consume more sustainably? Like, we need to be more precise. For the example of individually wrapped cheese in the cafeteria was mentioned, and that there should be a balance between, okay, do we wrap individually the cheese so that we have more packaging, or if we don't, if we have just a big block of cheese, that there would be food waste. And the second element that was stressed was that next to the balance was the need for specificity and context, and country, which location, which target group, and so on. The keyword from the last input on the definition of what does the sustainable food system mean was about diversity, with the example of maize in Mexico. That diversity is the root of a sustainable system, that conservation and use of biodiversity is reflected also in the use of maize that can be used for several things. So, and also that diversity is the culture in agriculture, and that Mexico banned the import of GMO maize to protect the biodiversity and the market. Another interesting statistic is the comparison between the peasant food system and a commodity chain, where the peasant food system has 70% of production and 30% of use of land resources, while the commodity chain is the opposite. And this again might link to the imbalance mentioned before. The question about the food system was not mentioned too much during like specifically during this talk, but said it's not about the food, it's about power inequalities and other variables. And this should be in respect to the 3 pillars of sustainability. Towards so, what are some challenges and potential solutions for a sustainable food system? Was mentioned that we know what works, but why are we not doing it? There is an excessive power of agribusiness lobbies in the world at the moment, and a lack of power of government. So that we're not solving this problem in supermarket. And linked to this lack of power of government, also lack of leadership that could be taken over by some by the G20 or the G7, for example. Also, lack of power of government is linked to too little fundings going towards agroecological solutions. Climate change is a challenge as much as the need for a structural change, and it is now a new urgency towards it. The solutions, what can be possible solutions? Well, the empowerment of smallholders, to have a clear leadership, to have a structural and generational change linked to life education, more state intervention, change from the business as usual that there is now, making small action, starting with small action, and also to deindustrialize education. So this is what I grasped from the conversation of today. Thank you.
Truly amazing.
Thank you
work.
so much. Go on, Delphine.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to give you the last minute to close the session. Yeah, I'm very impressed by this amazing sketch. Thank you.
Yes, hopefully we'll find a way to maybe share it with everyone as well. I saw a lot of people were very interested in that. Wraps up the session really beautifully, as well as the whole of Sustainability Week Geneva. We're very grateful for all of you to have joined today. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for joining and really being so informative and sharing so much of your knowledge with us. We hope the last hour and a half have inspired you in some way, whether that means taking action or thinking about things from a new perspective. With that being said, hopefully we'll see you next year for Sustainability Week 2022, perhaps even in person next year. Hope you enjoy the weekend, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the organizers. Have a good weekend.